Well, it is 12:10, so I'm going to go ahead and kick things off because we have a really big and distinguished set of panelists here, and I know that you want to hear from them and not from me. Welcome, I'm Erica Offerdahl. I'm the director of the Transformational Change Initiative, which is in the Office of the Provost and Executive Vice President. Today is our last pit stop for the semester. These are monthly opportunities for anybody who has teaching responsibilities to, I'm just seeing, is anybody getting strange feedback? Shauna, I think it's only you. Anyway, these are just monthly get-togethers for learning about innovations or new pedagogical approaches or new technologies. And one of the things I've been hearing from faculty across the system is that, this is the time of the semester where engagement can feel a little low, or maybe engagement has seemed a little bit low since the pandemic. So I thought that I would invite some of my favorite lecturers, teachers, instructors, professors, gurus is really the word I'm looking for. I invited them to come and speak. These are all folks that are well recognized for their excellence in teaching. So I'm going to step out of the way and I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves really quickly. And we'll start with Blythe.
Hi there. My name is Blythe Duell. I'm on the Pullman campus and I teach in the psychology department. In terms of big enrollment courses, I teach Psych of Gender every semester, which has between 120 and 180 people in it. And then I also teach the infamous Human Sexuality course, which ranges in size from about 250 to nearly 500.
Hi, I'm Cara Hawkins-Jedlicka. Sorry, my camera just did that weird thing. I am on the Pullman campus, and I'm in strategic communication. My large class is probably on the smaller end of larger classes out of this lovely group because my class tops out at 107 this semester, but 120 is as high as the enrollment goes. And it's an introduction to public relations course.
Hey everybody, I'm Clif Stratton. I'm an associate professor in the history department. I'm also on the Pullman campus. I have mostly taught in my career at WSU History 105, Roots of Contemporary Issues, which is a first year UCOR course. I've taught that class anywhere from a section of 75 to a section of 120, 130 with breakout discussion sections. I'm currently teaching a 200 level course called Baseball and American Social Movements, also a first year course mostly. And that course has it has 77 students in it, but it's capped at 80. So I think I'm actually on the lowest end of this group.
Hi, everyone. My name is John Hinz. I'm in the School of Molecular Biosciences here on the Pullman campus. I teach Biology 107. We typically have between 400 and 470 students in there in Todd Auditorium. That is our teaching space.
Hey everyone, I'm Lisa Carloye. I'm also on the Pullman campus in the School of Biological Sciences, and I teach the companion course to John, Biology 106. And we regularly have the full Todd Auditorium full. So 538 students is that one. And I also teach Biology 102, which is general biology for non-majors, also in Todd Auditorium. And with lower enrollment, we're closer to 300, but it has been the full 538.
Right. So although you've noticed that I selected people who teach really big classes, I chose them for a reason. Not only are they distinguished faculty recognized for their teaching, but if you can master engagement in these large enrollment classes, many of those lessons will translate very nicely to smaller sort of context. So there's something here for everyone, I guarantee, even if you're not teaching in these giant rooms. I'd like to begin, though, by just hearing from each of you. What does student engagement mean to you? So we'll start with Blythe again.
Thanks, Erica. And thank you all for being here. It's really nice to see people who are interested in teaching and want to make their teaching better. It makes me happy to be in a group that is looking for ways to do this better. We talked about this a bit in a pre-meeting, and I think that some of the most important things for engagement are simply being present, being mindfully present. And so anything that we can do to get students to be present is helpful. I think what is not engagement is sort of the old school approach to teaching. And this has to do with mindlessly writing down, copying down the words on a PowerPoint slide. So engagement can include engagement with the professor, but it can also mean engagement with other students. I think another thing that we need to consider is that based on the wide variety of disciplines that are present in this room and on this panel, engagement can mean really different things depending on what we're trying to teach. So that might mean learning how to solve a certain kind of problem, or it might mean considering the perspective of another person or another kind of person. So I think that that's where I'm going to stop. I'm going to leave the others some things to talk about, but I hope those are some places to get us started.
I'll build on that, of course. So yeah, I'm not a person who likes to be a sage on the stage. Yes, I do have a Britney Spears mic, but I don't want to have to like sit there and be Britney Spears. So I typically am trying to get students to kind of, or have an environment where students are actively participating in their learning. Sometimes co-creating meaning in the classroom, but doing something. I don't like listening to myself for longer than 20 minutes. That's sometimes hard on those Tuesday, Thursday classes because I know how much stuff I need to get through. But, you know, I really am trying to kind of have this active way of doing things where they don't have to hear me for too long and that we're doing stuff in class. And I was on another panel last week for our graduate students, and one of my mentors was talking about how she just likes to have play in her class and where it's kind of a playful environment. So like we're learning things and it feels like play. And I think I take a little bit of that. If we can leave the classroom laughing due to some silly improv game that I made them play, I'm more than happy to have that happen.
I think I'm next in the alphabetical list. For me, student engagement is activating their curiosity and their sense of purpose. I think that too often students will come into a course, particularly if it's a lower division course, which is where many of these larger courses reside, thinking that there's going to be some content that they need to learn. I don't know if they think that they'll retain that content after the exam or the class, but that will be the experience. But whenever we can get students to be curious about our subjects and to ask questions and to connect the learning they're doing in our course to some sense of purpose for them. This is particularly true if we are teaching non-majors, which we often are in these large sections, not always, but then I think we go a long way in getting them engaged. I'll add, since we're thinking about probably different ways of delivering content, I think we can increase engagement anytime we ask or teach students how and then ask them to access and apply information rather than simply deliver it to them. I'll pass it over to John.
Thank you. For me, for student engagement, I like to have the tangibles, which means I like to have the students interact with me. Since in Todd Auditorium, we have the microphone, we get a lot of professor to student communication, but I like the student to professor communication. So I do encouragement for them to ask questions to me. And I also pose many questions to them. And I'll tell you about the reward system later. So I like that I also like student-student communication within Todd Auditorium as well. I think that is an important part of them finding that cohesiveness as a group within the auditorium space. And yes, they do that in the labs. Our lab sections are much smaller and more intimate, but I like to see that in the large lecture space as well.
But it's always hard going last because everybody said everything I wanted to say. But I agree with Blythe, and I think everybody, that engagement is not students rapidly writing down everything that they can from the PowerPoint. And I really think of student engagement as when students are actively thinking about the material that I'm presenting. And one of the key foundations, I think, for that active thinking and not just kind of capturing the words, but thinking about the content and the concepts, is that curiosity. So I really do think that students who are curious are more engaged, and they absorb the information differently than students that are just trying to capture everything and leave the room with a bunch of stuff. And so when I think about my lectures and how to conduct my different classes, I usually start with thinking about, like, how can I engage students in this information? And so I typically start with asking myself, well, what is remarkable about this information that I want to convey to students and have them think about and have them work with? It's like, what might catch their attention? What might be like a, oh, wow, kind of a moment? Or is there a way to deliver some information and then me stop talking and give them something to actually do with that information? And so, like John, I think that doing case studies, getting them to think about and apply the information, but also the opportunity to talk to each other about the information and do some peer learning in that as well. And so I think trying to find ways to spark curiosity and to allow them to apply the information is really helpful for getting students to engage.
Shauna has a question.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to add, I hear a lot about getting students to talk to each other. And I was going to say that the sound of the classroom for me really is indicative about how I think my students are engaging with the material. When I ask them a question and whether they're speaking to each other, there's a roar. If they've read the material and they understand it, you can hear. If they haven't read, it's pretty obvious, right? And I say it just happened to me this week. And then also, what for me demonstrates engagement, I can always tell a student when my students liked a particular source is when they start to use it, not just in the discussion at the time, but later on. So for example, I gave them a source about the status of women in Southeast Asia. And for some reason, they just really liked that source. And I gave them that source in week 4. And we were just doing a final review. That's not even on the final. And students are talking about that article still. So that tells me that they engaged with it, they understood it, and they liked it. And so I guess those are some things when they start to, I'm hearing the words like apply the knowledge and student talking to each other, but like, how do we measure that? And I think that's how I measure that, is the sound of the room and also them actually dropping names and using the material, fluently, I guess, in my classes.
Thanks, Shauna. So Lisa, this time you get to go first.
Oh, okay. Well, that's perfect, because I was going to jump in on Shauna. One of the key things that makes my heart swell is when students tell me, oh, I was telling my mom about what we were doing in class yesterday. It's like, to me, that really means that they were really engaged. There was something that captured their curiosity and their fancy, and they wanted to share it. So yeah, I agree. The sound in the room and sharing with other people is really awesome. Okay, Erica, what's our last question?
No, this is the question. This is where we get what every faculty member wants, is to steal other people's good ideas that they can do in their classroom. So, Lisa, we talked about what student engagement means to you. How do you do it? How do you support student engagement?
Yeah, so it is challenging in Todd Auditorium in particular, because as Erica mentioned, there's no aisle. The students in the very middle are really far away from you, and you cannot get to them because it is jam-packed with their backpacks. And I mean, they're like sardines in there. So I've adopted a couple of techniques to use for my large lecture classroom. So uh, one of the things is, I mean, these are really small things. I'll get to my more creative things, but I do make sure that I walk up and down the aisles and I check in with my back row, right? So that they feel me and they feel more connected, because I've sat in the back row in Todd 116 and you are far away from any action happening at the front. And so trying to bring the front to them is one of the things I think is helpful. I don't think that's engagement, but I think it sets the stage for engagement with the students. They feel more connected. So that's a little thing. Another little thing I do is I use clickers, which probably many of you do, but it's kind of a way to break up the lecture, get them talking to each other to answer the questions. I make mine both count for points and also for participation, so they can get points just for answering. But I do put some credit on there, which students, I don't know, some like it, some don't, but I like them to actually have something at stake, I guess, in order to really think about the material and try to get it right. So then the things that are a little more creative that I do. So I do try to introduce application by, I make little mini case studies. So something that can be done in 10 minutes, because I don't really feel like it has to be quick, I think, because students you start to lose them. They start to think about other things. They start to think, okay, it's time to go. And so I try to make things pretty quick and intervene, for 10 minutes. And my little mini case studies are physical pieces of paper, because I think it's better to have it on their desk, talking to each other, looking at a thing instead of their screens. And so I just make little half sheets. I collate them ahead of time. I give them to the first person in each row and I say, hold on to it until we're ready. I don't want it out there distracting them while I'm giving them the information that they need to do it. And so then I go, okay, go, pass it down. So that's how I try to get it quickly down the aisles and into their hands. And my little mini case studies are structured along Bloom's taxonomy. So the first question is usually just something basic terminology. Here's a nephron, label the parts. Like we just talked about this. This is easy. And just get them warmed up. And then work my way toward how does the system work? And then what happens if you tweak something, kind of a thing. And what would the outcome be? And try to make them see how things as mundane as an action potential, creating a nerve transmission, how does that relate to when I go to the dentist and they give me a shot of Novocaine, and why does that make it not hurt, right? So I try to do little things like that. And then the other thing I've really been trying to do lately is sketching, because in Biology 106 and also in Biology 102, we do a lot of processes, and students really struggle with a process because they're really used to flashcards and a piece of information. I want to learn this piece of information. And that doesn't work very well, because I was telling them these physiological processes, it's a movie, not a picture, right? You have to tell the story. You have to see it unfold over time and who's doing what and how does it change. And so I started, I'll use the document camera and I have them sketch it with me so that I can teach them how to sketch, how to simplify the system. So if we're going to do circulation, don't make a beautiful anatomically correct heart. It's a box with 4 chambers, right? Just capture the essence of what we want to do. And then, it's like draw the system. And now let's take the players and run it through. Let's take the red blood cell through, let it deliver its oxygen, pick up its CO2, go back to the heart, right? Go back to the lungs to pick up a new load. And so by having them do this, it really helps them figure out not only the process, but also how to study. Go get a whiteboard, just keep doing this. Don't keep reading about it, but do it. And the other thing that I think it really helps them is, I use PowerPoint, but when I stop and do sketching, I do the document camera. And I think that creates a connection between me and the students, because we're kind of doing something together in real time, and it's not prepackaged. And I think that there's something more connecting about sketching with them or writing with them in real time. So, and I find that that students are more receptive to sketching as the semester goes on, because the case studies, they do it at first, and then after a while I start to notice they just hold on to it. I'm going to do it later. They don't do it in real time because it's not fresh and new anymore, I think. So I guess that's the other thing about student engagement, is I try to keep it fresh. And then the last thing I'll just mention, in Biology 102, the one for non-majors, I've figured out ways to have students do some acted out kind of things. So I have them act out the dynamics of a COVID test, and I have them act out translation, making a protein. And then I immediately follow that with a little in-class mini case study worksheet, because sometimes the entertainment value trumps the learning value. And so I want to make sure that those two things get connected together, and that they understood what they were supposed to take away from the acting it out. But that's always fun, because that's their own peers up there doing stuff. So those are a couple of the things that I've been trying out in my large lecture classrooms to get students to engage and to enhance their ability to understand and learn how to study as well.
Right. Yeah. Todd Auditorium is a tricky one because there are people who are pretty far away. Because I do my measuring in as far as communication is going, where it's student to professor communication, which is something I'm always striving for, and then student to student. For the student to professor communication, I just have an awards system. On a simple thing, like a student asking me a good question related to the material, or a student answering something associated with a question that I propose, I have stickers that are specific for the class. And this first sticker is an example of one that was designed by one of my previous students. That's a mitochondrion there. That's a play on the powerhouse of the cell. And so we designed this sticker. I pass these stickers out in class. Sometimes I even do a thing where I just pass it down the row, so everyone down the row gets to take one and pass it on. And this helps encourage students to do some of the interaction. It's not full go, but one thing it does do is it gives some continuity from class to class, because students see stickers from previous semesters. I've also had students offer to make additional stickers, and so I had another student design a sticker. They were desperate to design one. This is a bacteriophage here, but in the Jolly Roger form, and it's got Bio 107 on it as well. And so, so the stickers, those go out in class. I do have better prizes than stickers, but I won't go into those, and those are special situations. For student-to-student interaction, which I also think is very important, because I want the students to feel like they're part of a community in the class, and they get that in our lab spaces, because in the labs we make them do a bunch of discussion things. But I want to encourage that in the classroom as well. And so one thing I want them to do is I want them to have some effort where they come together and get an opportunity to earn something. And so, like Lisa using clickers, I use something very similar. I do Top Hat. It's virtually the exact same thing. I can put multiple choice questions up on the board and they can answer. But for mine, since it tells me what percentage of the students got it right once they have all submitted their answer, what I do is I just have a 90% threshold, and any of these questions, if the class in its entirety is 90% right or better, I give everyone in the class a point of extra credit. And so once I start that 1-minute timer, the students will read through the question, and they'll immediately start talking to their neighbors and their surrounding people, because people want to make sure that they all have the same answer before they commit to something, simply because if they reach that 90% threshold, they get a point of extra credit. It does not happen that frequently in the class, so 90% is a pretty good threshold. Sometimes we'll even barter with them and offer, if they get 94, I'll give you 2 points instead of the one at 90. And sometimes I get them to bite on that as well. They don't hit 94 very often, so that's a great gamble from my side. And so when I'm trying not to give them extra credit points, so that works. So that's one of the things that I do for student-student interaction. The other thing I do, and to also have them get a little bit of kinetic activity going on in the class, is we play games in the class as well. And one of the games that I play that's a good example, but I can only do it a couple times a semester because it wears out its welcome pretty quickly, is one called Beach Ball Multiple Choice, where I put multiple choice questions up on the board and I have students standing in each corner of the lecture hall. Of course, they're rewarded for participating with stickers because I can get them to do anything with stickers. And they'll hold up a letter, and then we throw some beach balls out there. They're actually playground balls, so they hit a little hard. But they're bouncing these balls around, and they just bounce them towards the general corner that they think is the right answer. There's no reward system for this game. It's just entertaining them and entertaining me because I get to see them throw balls at each other. But it also just gives them some activity to do where they get to answer questions that I posed up on the board, and they kind of get to work together. And sometimes we see the balls go in separate corners, and that's really great as well. So anyway, that's how I try to encourage that student interaction, is let them act as a team and let them work together in ways that give them an opportunity to earn something as a class, or at least get some excitement in that regard.
Well, I'm gonna have to try beach balls in the class. I like this. So I mentioned earlier, I teach a course on baseball and American social movements, and it has about it currently has 77 students enrolled, and I also teach it in Spark 235, which is a room with shared student technology. Students sit at a table with 5 or 6 other students, and they have access to a large monitor and a keyboard and a trackpad so that they can do some things collectively using the technology. A couple of things that I've decided to do with this class, and it is the first time I've taught it this semester. One is to make most of the major assignments team assignments. So there's a series of primary source analyses that student teams do in about every 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the length of the lesson on that topic. These are assignments where students have done the secondary source reading on their own. We've worked with it in class, usually with small discussion groups and a set of questions prompted by me to gain some basic understanding. And then students, I teach them how to search for primary sources on a particular topic. And so they do this as a group. They decide on a source together that they think kind of represents the historical process or development that we've been learning about. I'm able to check in with them. I have a TA in this class too, so they're moving around and checking in with students too, kind of confirming with them, yes, this looks like a good primary source. And so then they this usually takes about 2 class periods, 50 minutes each. The finding the source, doing a bit of summary of it, but then analyzing it using secondary source readings. And so they're doing a lot of their, what would typically be solo writing in a kind of essay format, doing it together in class. This does pose problems. There are students who are not present when we do this. So I've had to sort of design a point structure that reflects their presence and active participation. But I think on the whole, it's been a rewarding thing. One, it cuts down on the amount of grading that I or my TA have to do. We're grading 13 assignments rather than 77. And we can offer really meaningful feedback to students in that way because there just aren't as many to get through. Having them do it in class really cuts down on the temptation to use AI or other methods of generating content that isn't theirs. And so that's been a really rewarding process. What's really great about it is I can sit down with groups of students and actually talk about their sources with them during class, rather than kind of send them out, do this on your own, and then they send it back to me through Canvas and we sort of see what they came up with. We can troubleshoot some of the things. So if they don't understand what a primary source is, or they're not really approaching analysis in the way that an historian would, we can talk about that, can stop all the groups and talk about it if we need to during class. The other thing that I've decided to do in this class is to give over the last 4 weeks of the course to a multi-stage scaffolded project. So those same teams that were working on their primary source analyses over a series of 4 of those in the semester are also currently designing a virtual museum exhibit for the National Baseball Hall of Fame on one of the topics that we've talked about. So in this case, they're taking what they did together, finding primary sources and using secondary sources to analyze them, to do this in a larger context and to present it in a way that isn't a kind of short writing exercise, but rather something in a three-dimensional virtual space that has visual images and that written analysis and historical analysis that they've been learning about. So again, both of these things are not without their challenges. When I teach this again, I'm going to spend a lot more time talking about concepts and skills related to teamwork. And that's maybe one of the other things I want to say about engagement is whenever we can focus the activities and assignments we do on skill development and concept application, as Lisa and John were talking about, if our learning outcomes are about those things, developing those skills, then I think we're more likely to have higher engagement than if we're simply delivering things to students that more than likely they could read in a book or some other format. Last thing I'll say is build in lots of time for reflection on their learning. Low stakes reflection. I don't mean to say exams are reflection. Those are tests. Low stakes reflection on their learning.
Okay, yeah. It's hard to follow those three, and Blythe's gonna hit it out of the park after me, so I'll keep my time short. I mean, really, when I'm thinking back to everything I've heard here, I do really try to think about kind of a low stakes environment to practice things. As a communications professor, I mean, I'm not teaching whatever the thing was with Novocaine. I'm usually teaching them, how not to say something dumb, and what public relations means. And, the biggest issue for me is to telling them, ethics and not to lie. So oftentimes we are practicing things and then bringing it to the class. I do a ton of think, pair, shares, usually about questions or mini case studies. Those tend to be ways that the students really like to be involved. I call it improv. I don't know if it is improv, but I do one of my favorite ones this semester was I made them do a focus group about like silly questions and gave everybody a role of like what a typical one role in the focus group would be. And then they had to guess each other's and do this whole situation. And all of this sounds kind of complicated. The thing is I'm not grading it. This is in class. And they do get points. I will say I do a kind of a loose attendance. They have 17 opportunities in class or out of class to get 10 activities, sometimes 16. I don't tell them it's that many. I tell them they'll get 13, so they get a little nervous. But with that, they come to class. And oftentimes I'm telling them to go into Canvas and put in a password. So like this week, the password was turkey. Put the password in, I give them points. It's not grading a lot. Also, I try to give them an opportunity to kind of show and tell. We were talking about stickers. I think sometimes you take things from being a 5-year-old. I have a 5-year-old, and sometimes I steal so much from his daycare class. It's not even funny. We do current events. So I use Packback because it is AI graded. We can get into some more of that, but it's nice. Tell them to write something about current events and public relations. I pick my favorite at the end of the week, and we spend the first 20 minutes on Friday talking about it. With Packback, they're able to prep before they come to class, so they know they can get called on. If they get called on, I give them in or there. They get 2 points of extra credit. and can see who else has responded, right? And so then we have a whole class discussion. And I think most of the time it's really just kind of, well, two things: letting go a little bit of control. That's scary. But, one of my favorite things to do in all of my classes, if I know a subject well enough, I use the snowball method in a different way than maybe you've learned in Lift, where I ask them to ask me a question about this thing. Okay, I know social media. I'm on it way too much, but I also study it. So do you have a question? Any question about social media? What's your question? Write on a sheet of paper, throw it at me. Do not hit me. Hard. I will then go through the whole entire class period, and that's what I do, is just answer questions. And I don't know what that's going to look like, but I'm pretty confident that I can answer the question. If not, I look it up later. And then really kind of lastly, I do a lot of storytelling, and I think that's probably just because of who I am as a human. But yeah, we just went over Crisis Comm. Oh my God. And I used to work at University of Idaho. Let me tell you, I was there for 5 years. Let me tell you, I can tell you some stuff. But I typically am able to relate my professional experience in PR to something that they have, or we'll even bring in, current event stuff that I've seen maybe on TikTok. I'm on that too much too, but like we talked about Kendrick and Drake this semester and libel because we could. So just some small things, but really it's just trying to get people laughing and wanting to be there. Last, and then I'll hand this over to Blythe so she has time. I also try to make sure there's multiple ways of interacting. I sometimes have brilliant students who don't want to talk up. They don't want to talk in class. And sometimes I wish they would, because they're the ones with the right answer or the smartest insight, right? And I realized this a couple of semesters ago with one student in particular, because I don't know how she wasn't just looking at some people like they're idiots, because her answers are so much better. So I use Padlet, it's free. I use a couple of other ones where people have a way, especially even in those think pair shares, where they think about a question, talk to it, and then share back out, where maybe someone's voice isn't heard directly, but it's heard in a different way, and making sure we have those ways to interact too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cara. We talked a lot in this question about engaging students inside the classroom, and Cara touched on engaging them out, and so outside of the classroom. And so I want to mention also Perusal. Perusal is a really good tool, which is basically free. There might be some changes to that. It allows students in my classes to hear a voice other than mine, which is really important to me. Engage with the material, engage with other students, and very often what I see on Perusal is them referring to things we're talking about in the class. So you can use videos on Perusal, you can use podcasts, you can use papers. I would recommend not using really long papers or really long chapters. I don't think those work the best, but for things like a talk, Perusal works fantastically. In terms of engaging students in the classroom, something that I have learned is if we can find a way to get students to get to the answer, it's much more powerful than us telling them the answer. So of course there have been some examples of that that Lisa and John have talked about, when there's a very specific correct answer. But even in something which is more social sciences oriented, we have these situations. So one of the things that I have done is I've used word clouds to have them answer certain kinds of questions. As an example, we know that we refer to men and women with really different kinds of language. And so I give them a word cloud. If you saw that man over there, but you weren't saying that man, what other word would you use? And we see the word cloud, and we see the word cloud for women. And I say, what do you notice? What are the differences? What do you notice? That is one of my favorite questions in class. I often use this question also when I'll pull up a graph or a table about a study. I say, what do you notice? I think that implies that I am not the only expert in the room. They may notice things that I don't notice, and what they notice is important. And I think that also emphasizes that this is a two-way game. This is not just me telling them the information. This is a conversation. Cara also talked about something that I think is really important, and that's how we ask questions. So I learned this a while ago. I try not to ever say who has a question. I'm sorry. I try not to say, does anyone have a question? Because that shuts things down in my experience. If instead you say, who has a question, it just feels like there's a different feeling behind it, and people are less afraid to sort of speak up if it's asked in that way. I'll say two more things really quickly. I have a plan to do this next semester. I've been trying to do this for about a year, but I really want to know what my students want to know about the topics that we are teaching in the classes, that I'm teaching in the classes. And so I have a plan ready for next semester where they will have an opportunity to ask questions in sort of a Google form. So not a snowball. I'm not sure that I'm confident enough about that as Cara is. But I'll have some time to sort of go through the questions, do some research if I need to do the research. I think that will engage their curiosity, but it will also help me sort of have a pulse on what's interesting to them, what's not, what are things that I don't know that they want to know about. And then the last thing is I'm doing an extra credit discussion board in 2 of my classes this semester where I ask them to share things with me. So again, on Perusal, I've been sharing papers and podcasts and TED Talks, and I say, for extra credit, you share something with me, give me a brief description of it, give me 2 meaningful questions about that source. And that gives me this huge document of stuff that I can look through for future semesters. So, all right, I think I'll hand it back to Erica.
That is such a clever way of crowdsourcing and finding new content for your class. That's brilliant.
In PR, we call that user-generated content.
So these are all some really great ideas, and I really appreciate you sharing with us. I want to open it up to the rest of you that are here. First of all, do you have questions about what you heard, or did it spark a remembrance of something cool that you have found successful in the classroom? So I'm just going to unpin our folks here so that everyone knows that they're allowed to unmute and talk and share and ask questions. Shelly, go for it.
This goes way back to Lisa's, how the heck do you act out COVID? What was it?
Yeah, it's the COVID test, right? That we all do with our COVID
Yeah.
test. Yeah, so in Todd, the screen is huge. And so I actually just make a slide that has the 3 lines and a little circle where you drop the little, the dropper, put your sample. And then I have 2 lines down the road. And then I just have students come up. So it's an antibody test. And I actually use bathroom plungers to be my antibodies, and then bath scrunchies to be the antigen, right? The thing you're testing for. So I bring students up to stand on the in front of the lines at the board, and I give them plungers. And then I have students come, have students volunteer to come down, and they are going to either have the bath scrunchie or not, if it's a positive versus a negative test. And then I just say, okay, go. And so then they walk down and they put the bath scrunchies in the antibodies, and then I clickerize it, and then I say, okay, everybody, is this a positive test or a negative test, or is it a faulty test, right? If they screw it up. So that's kind of how I do it, is I just have them stand there and I tell them what to do, and I assure them, you just do what I tell you to do. You don't have to know anything. You're not putting you on the spot. You're just like, you're a prop. And they appreciate that, because otherwise nobody would volunteer if they really felt like their understanding was on display.
Thank you. That helps a lot more. I was trying to picture, I don't know what I was picturing, but thank you.
Oh, so John, these are brand new plungers, never been used.
Any other questions or any ideas you'd like to share with your colleagues? Because I know all of you have expertise. Thanks, Teddy. Clickers are can be used so masterfully, but also sometimes are the technology piece is overwhelming for some faculty. Like, I don't want to have to learn how to do it and then download it and then all the stuff. I was one of those faculty. So I do a really low tech version of clickers. I have a piece of paper that I print off at the very beginning of the semester, and it has colors in the four corners, like red, green, yellow, blue, and then A, B, C, D. And I 3-hole punch it and I give it to them. And so when it comes, if I think of a clicker question, a multiple choice question on the fly, I can, type it into my slide. And then I tell them to fold their card and hold it in front of them. And so very quickly I can see it's a sea of one color, or no, everyone's really lost. And I find that is useful for students because I don't know, even the clicker part where they're clicking in, some of them feel like, even in a big class, like, oh, Offerdahl's gonna know that I got this one wrong, right? And they're stressed out about it. And I'm like, I am not going through a roster of 200 on a clicker question. Like, I want you to fail in class because this is where I can help you learn. But being able to like put it on their chest where their friends can't even really see it well means it's just this like private contract, that they're sort of lost in a sea of color. So you don't always have to be really high tech. You can be creative like John and Lisa with toilet plungers and beach balls, or you can be, boring but kind of creative like me with a little piece of paper.
Can I jump? I see we have a good question in the chat. I just wanted to jump in on that comment, Erica, because I think there are different strategies with different goals. So giving students the opportunity to kind of not show everybody else what their choice was is, I think, good in some ways. But one of the powerful things that I discovered by accident using clickers was having the display that shows a graph of how many students said A, how many students said B, actually completely shut down the complaints that students would say, well, nobody understands this, right? Nobody, this is your fault. You're doing a bad job because nobody understands this. And when I started using clickers, they can see, oh, just about everybody understands it except me and my friends. And so I think it's helpful for students to see if they're really struggling or if they don't really know it, to understand that it's something they need to work on, rather than, oh, it's the teacher's fault, I can't do anything. So I think there's value both ways in
And I can piggyback on top of that, Lisa, as well. Like, if every single day in class, the majority of students are getting it right, and you're on the outer side of it, but you've been really trying, that can feel bad too. But like, if you display to the whole course and it's really split, what an opportunity for these students to lean into growth mindset, right? It's like, wow, we all really do need to spend some time here and dig in. So yeah, these tools that we have can be used for different purposes and can be powerful in different ways. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Long had a question, team.
I use gossip.
He would like to have more students sitting in the front because hopefully that'll be better for engagement. What have been your strategies to entice students to be closer to you physically in the class? Ooh, I mean, sit closer to the front. The way I was phrasing that was going to be rad.
I talk to them if they're in the front, and so I usually like build kind of an interesting rapport with the front row, because I'm usually I hate to use this term, but like dicking around trying to get my stuff together, and we're having like conversations about, my kid dropping the F-bomb or something like that, and it's kind of funny. And so then I start slowly getting more students in the front. But I don't actually push it. It just kind of happens naturally. Also, if you have the baseball team in your classes, they have to sit in the front. So I usually always have my baseball men right there in the front. But Basketball, not so much, and they scare me because they're very tall and they sit in the back, but I've gotten to them this semester, but they are very tall men, and sometimes it's a little intimidating.
I think it's a really good question, and I don't have a great answer, and I don't have a solution. You can make a rule. On test days, I don't let anybody sit in the last 2 rows. You could do that. But I think it's probably more effective to actually move around. Let people be comfortable where they are in the class, but bring yourself to them.
One thing that I do as this semester goes on is when I talk to students who kind of feel disengaged or intimidated or something, I point out to them that the closer you sit to the front, the smaller the class is, because everybody behind you disappears, right? You only see the people in front of you. So if students feel like they're lost in this big sea, I say sit up front. The class gets way smaller when you only see, you know, the people in the front.
I don't know how this would work in a room where all of the students are in front of you, but in the lecture in the round room in the Spark, I've had, I mean, that room holds 240 plus students, and I've had 120 students in there. So I will just make one of the sections of seats off limits. They're not very deep rows, so now they're kind of all within my gaze, and I'm not like trying to spin around in the middle of the room to see all of them, and they're perfectly fine with that typically. Not leaving a section off limits.
I have a funny story about that, Cliff. I taught in there once. I actually don't like that room, but I didn't block off seats, and there were a smaller number of students than seats. And as the semester would go, I would go and talk toward the people where there were more people, and then they would shift to be further away from me. So I'd go and talk to them over there, and they shifted. So we kind of played this cat and mouse game all semester long with them moving away and me going to them. It was actually kind of funny to see that social dynamic play out.
When I was in a large lecture hall that didn't fill, so the capacity for the room was like 300, but my class was only 200. I wanted, and I would often have them work together, student to student, but I wanted to be able to get to them physically if they had a question. So I did do, I taped off every 2 rows. So in essence, students would, you know, there'd be 2 rows here, students could turn around and work with one another, and then there'd be a blank row so I could get to the groups. I know that's probably not possible if you're teaching in Todd Auditorium with 500, but if, you know, thinking creatively about what's the purpose of where you want your students to be, being respectful of what's comfortable for them, coming to them when you can, and finding a way to maybe balance it. It depends on what you're doing in the classroom. I see we're 3 minutes over time, and people are starting to naturally drop off. I'm going to stop recording and I'll post this on our YouTube channel. I want to thank all of our panelists for their energy, their commitment to student learning, and their commitment to you for being willing to come and share their expertise. And I assume that some might even stick around and answer additional questions if you have any that are burning, but thank you to our panel.